All right, cool. Let me just give us a sync. Sweet. Welcome to the Monkey Dance Podcast. This is Ohan.
This is Guilherme.
And we are sitting with Arianna.
Hi, guys.
What's up?
Hey.
Do you wanna tell us what you do?
Yeah, sure. So, sorry, guys. I will just try to find the optimal distance of the microphone along the way.
Nice. Yeah.
No problem.
So, I am a cognitive scientist, and I am generally interested in cooperation and how do people do things together, whether they like to do things together, what are the challenges of doing things together, and I'm interested in the development of such skills in infants and adults. And I'm interested in studying how people interact with machines and whether machines can interact with people in a smooth and comfortable way at all, whether it's even an interesting avenue of research or whether we should go somewhere else. Yeah.
If you could put it, if you could phrase it as a question, what's the most pressuring question that you have right now that you would like to work towards answering it?
Yes. What constitutes a good joint action, a good social interaction, and whether can we identify some features of a good joint action where coordination is smooth and people understand each other and people efficiently achieve their goals, whether these things can be truly formalized in one way, theoretically or empirically or mathematically, and whether these formalizations can be actually useful for informing interactions with artificial agents in the physical domain, or whether that's even interesting to do at all. That's maybe a meta question for me. I don't know whether that's a good avenue of research or not, whether we should spend our money on those things or not at all. I mean, yeah, these are the things I'm thinking about now.
And when you say good, you mean efficient or something else?
Good point. I mean, within the framework of cognitive science or robotics or in general the study of human behavior, in theory, good means efficient. Which is, I think, one way to assess the goodness of anything. But with respect to social interactions and the joint actions, especially, I think good also means rewarding and enjoyable to a certain extent. And enjoyable is a very loose term, as I'm using it on purpose. It could mean anything for anyone. But it characterizes one aspect of coordinating with others that I think is fundamental for us when we engage and when we decide whether to engage or not. So the efficiency aspect is, of course, something that I think people have also investigated a lot. So I'm not the first one who's thinking about it. And there are millions of models to assess efficiency, and we could be discussing, how good they are, how good they approximate, what people expect the actions to be, the efficiency of the action to be. But I think people expect other things as well from social interactions. And those are, I think, are really important for our decisions in everyday life. So, yeah.
Can you give us a prototypical example of a joint action?
That was loud. So prototypical, like the textbook.
I mean, what you think of, what you like to think of.
Okay, I'm going to give you the textbook one because it's also, if you are a joint action researcher and you attend any conference of joint action, you're going to be counting how many times a speaker uses it as the prototypical example of a joint action.
Is it the couch?
It's the couch.
It's the couch.
Yes.
So there have been bets made, people have lost money, people had paid beers to others, it's a thing.
Amazing.
So the couch example is, it's prototypical also because it's very good. So, how do people do things together on a very pragmatic level? How do people move an object from A to B? That's the most simple case, and prototypical case. And why is it prototypical? I think it's because it keeps together a lot of the things that are in fact important. First of all, that people need to want to move the couch together. They need to share the goal of doing it together. And they need to know that they need to be aware that the other person also wants it, right? So it's not only it's not enough to think that we share the goal of doing it together. I also need to be confirming that your goal while we're doing it is to move it together to that specific location. So if we don't know that, we will be stuck very soon. We wouldn't know which trajectory to take. We would bump into things. We would, hurt each other. So there is the aspect of representing the intentional action of the partner, the goals of the partner, and the goal of the pair, of the couple doing the action. And then there is the fact that, as any action that we perform in the real world, it has physical constraints. And these constraints are given by the environment, but they are also given by our own cognition. So the way that we interact with the object and the way we can perceive it, and the position of our body with respect to the partner, and whether we need to do a mental rotation in our head in order to know what the other person is about to do. All of these things are really affecting our everyday life in any single action that we do, even more so when we do actions with others. But that's the prototypical case, and that's a case where you can imagine that that I actually not only might like to move furniture around with you, let's say, but I might also need you, because maybe this object is too big for me and I can't move it by myself. So that's a specific case in which doing things together, it's necessary for me to achieve both my individual goal and our shared goal, if we have a shared goal.
So is something like boxing, would you consider that a joint action? I mean, we both have the same goal in that we want to figure out who's better. I understand that your goal slightly differs from mine in that your goal is to defeat me, my goal is to defeat you. But we do have this collective set. We do have a collective goal of continuing the boxing match and figuring out who's better.
I think competition can be a shared goal, for sure. It can be an antagonistic goal, but what I could be representing as a meta representation as a meta goal, let's say, is that we achieve the end of the game together or the match together. Mm-hmm. Now, I wouldn't say that we have the shared goal of fighting each other in the sense that the specifications of fighting each other can't be shared truly, because otherwise there wouldn't be a fight. Mm-hmm. Because I would know exactly what I would know what you're gonna do. In order for our goal to be shared in a certain way, like from a motor representation point of view, I need to understand I need to be able to predict what you're about to do. And if I don't know what you're gonna do, and that's, I suppose, a good match, right? When the match is good, I don't know what you're gonna do, then I would say that from a motor representation point of view, we do not have a shared goal.
That makes a lot of sense. So that's why you wouldn't necessarily consider boxing to be joint action, mm-hmm. because I wouldn't be representing your motor movements, even though we have a shared goal.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would have to predictively in order to respond to you, and there is a timing to the act of boxing that requires me to, I need to be responding you quickly, so I'm probably predicting your actions constantly, even more than I would do if we were doing something cooperative. But that doesn't make our goals shared, right?
Yeah, and also if we're moving a couch together, I want you to predict my actions, and I know that. Yeah. Whereas, in boxing, I know that you're going to predict many of my actions, but I'm hoping that I manage to undo your predictions in some cases.
Precisely.
Well, there is a macro coordination problem there, right? That's you mentioned, that's arriving at the end of the competition, and that require us to coordinate on the set of specific rules that we abide to get to the end of it. Because if any of us broke the rules, either I can get punched, or like I get disadvantage by you breaking the rules, or if I break the rules, I can get caught and then I lost. So there is a kind of like a macro level of coordination there, which is going with the rules. So you can use it to predict as well. So if I am boxing against Owen, I know that he's going to throw punches and not kick.
Yeah, I think that that macro level you're referring to, within the cognitive science framework, we could refer to it as our common ground, which is all the sets of knowledge and specifications about the environment that allow us to reduce our coordination problems, let's say. Like narrowing down only the aspects where there is an actual ambiguity, by having already mutually acknowledged that we know that at least these things we know of what we are going to do. And we don't need to discuss those, or we don't need to negotiate those necessarily as frequently and as pressingly as we need to negotiate other things. So we are fighting a boxing match, which is not a, kung fu match or whatever, if there is a kung fu match, but whatever. We are agreeing on certain rules, and on those rules we don't need to discuss. So what is left for us to discuss, like figuratively, is everything that it's not already set in a competitive scenario.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. That maybe the ideal way to perform a joint action is to first reduce as many of the coordination problems as possible, and then you sort of have a couple of the remaining ones, which are just the act of doing the things themselves. And is motor always required for you? Like, does it always need to be a motor action, or can it be like us deciding upon a rule framework? That's not a joint action, right?
I think, let's say that in certain aspects of coordination, let's say that when we talk about joint actions, we talk about coordinating goals and actions in order to achieve some physical outcome, right? Goals can be also non-motor goals, for sure. So, and in order to coordinate our actions not in a physical way, we still need to rely on some coordination mechanisms. So as long as there is some change in the environment, that it's the result of our action and our intentions, then we can consider it a joint action. Now, if you can think of a way to change the environment according to your goals that does not involve acting at all, then let's discuss it. Because what doesn't count as action, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
That makes sense, yeah.
So it doesn't need to be, motor is just a way of saying it's implemented by the body in one way or another. So, yeah, I don't know if maybe it's a good point. Is there any way of affecting the environment that does not involve acting?
Yeah, without changing anything at all. I suppose if you expected me to speak and I just stood there and did nothing, then I would change the environment. Yeah. You would expect something and then you'd say something's wrong, or he's ignoring me or something like that. But that's probably the only way.
Yeah, not acting is definitely a way of changing the environment. But that's also, in order for me to know you're not acting, I need to try to predict your action and then fail to do so because there is no action to predict, right? So in a sense, I still need to recruit the same cognitive system. Yeah, that
makes a lot of sense.
The idea of a shared goal, is that the word shared there, do you think that's accurate?
Oh my man. Shared
is it like convergent goals, or
there is, I think, colloquially, I think shared goal is a good way of putting it, because what we mean is that we have a goal, both of us have a goal that either looks really similar and so we converge on it, or we have agreed that that's our shared goal. So it's literally shared because, it's the result of our negotiation in a way, or specification. Can be verbal or non-verbal, it doesn't really matter. Many cases of cooperation and coordination, I think, have to do with parallel goals that individuals have that don't collide, let's put it like this, happen to tangentially overlap, tangentially be compatible, and they don't need to be ultimately shared, right? They can be also just happen to be shared for a little while, and then people's action can diverge afterwards. But it's very hard for coordination to happen between people completely randomly. So you must at least assume that people have the intention to coordinate, or the goal to coordinate. Whether that's a shared goal doesn't need to be. We can be coordinating. I can be coordinating with you, and you don't necessarily need to want to coordinate with me for us to be coordinated. In that case, we are not sharing a goal, but we're still performing a joint action, right? So
if you're walking down the street and I predict the trajectory of your walk, and I throw like a ball to hit you in the head.
Yeah.
Did we coordinate on that?
I think that's a good if you manage to hit me, you're good at coordinating.
So I represent. Yes. It doesn't require that you also represented my motor action, because you didn't. Like, you don't see me. I throw the ball. I represent your motor action. Yeah. I have the goal.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, because then in this case, we don't have this shared goal in this case.
Yeah, we don't. But imagine of all the cases where one of the two agents in one of the two or one of the many agents in a coordinated action either does not have access to all the information, or does not have the capacity to handle that information, and nevertheless coordination happens. Those are cases where there isn't a shared goal. You can't say that if you are acting together with your 12-month-old on an object, you are having a shared goal of playing together necessarily. You can have indications that your 12-month-old also thinks you're playing together, for example. But does it mean that he holds in his mind, in his brain, a shared representation of the actions that are about to unfold in order to achieve the goal of playing together? No, most likely not, at least before 14 months. So, but we interact with infants and babies from the day they're born, right? So,
yeah. So because also when you interact with a dog or something, playing fetch.
Totally.
So you have a case where you can make the goals verbally explicit, and then in that case, the goals have they're propositions, and you can agree on them, or they can have like a shared logical structure, even if they're not the same words. Or they can just seem to be convergent enough where the outcome is satisfactory for both agents. Right, that's fair.
Yeah, and also this propositional nature of the goal, can work very well in many cases. So there, as soon as you have explicitated the goal in such a way, you are also reducing a lot all of the need for prediction and motor representation, right? So if you have specified basically everything of what you're gonna do, then you don't need to predict at all. Your motor system, is only dealing with the implementation, the programming of your own actions, and if there is an external clock to your actions, then you don't even need to predict the timing, for example. So, there are people who would say that if you use external tools like, I don't know, a clock or whatever other way to specify some parts of the coordination, you're using extended cognition, right? You're using devices that do the coordination part, and what you need to do is just to actually do the thing. Then maybe it's a stretch to call it a joint action, but actually from a mechanistic point of view, it is. Right, so
there will be a difference there, because you mentioned a couple of times ability to read intentions, and that wouldn't happen with an object, right? But for me it sounds like the same thing.
Yeah, I mean,
it's kind of like distribution of labor, right?
So
kind of.
Yeah, you distribute labor, cognitive labor, to devices, and multiple human agents can be interacting with devices that are doing the cognitive labor of coordinating us as human agents. In that case, we don't need to represent necessarily our intentions in a very timely manner. I guess we still need to understand why we are there. And I think we always try to understand, if we're doing something with others, why the other person is there, or what's the, is that person actually acting with me or not? So in a sense, maybe you are always even in a very unspecified way trying to represent what my intentions are. But it doesn't need to mean that the intentions are specifically they are represented by the specifics of my action, let's say.
But then, in your definition of joint action, for example, you mentioned in the beginning that you would be also interested in joint action between humans and robots, for example. Intentionality, or the ability of infer intentionality, is not necessary.
Don't make me say things that I will regret. But no, I don't think it is. I really don't think it is, depending on what we mean by intentionality, obviously. So I don't like to use the word intentions that much, because I am not myself clear on what they mean, what it means intention in the first place. But if we break down how intentions are explicitated by us as agents, then even in the case of the most dumb interaction with the machine needs to be able to pick some signs, some social cues, some cues that in my behavior that we as humans consider social cues. For the machine, it doesn't matter. They don't need to be social per se, they just need to be cues. But those cues are the cues that in an interaction between two humans you would pick up on in order to infer my intentions. It doesn't matter how many levels of processing would need for you to go from my gaze to my intentions. Let's forget about that for a second. But the cues are still the same. So you read my gaze, the machine has to read my gaze.
But you don't infer the intention of the machine.
No.
As much as sometimes people just like complain with their own computer and say, why do you do that? Or I don't know, sometimes you might...
You do, even if you shouldn't, let's say.
Anthropomorphize an object that you are interacting with, but the rational thing would be not to think that the machine has...
But so have you ever played or interacted with a robot in your life? If you have sat at the table with a robot, you will. I don't know. I wasn't so sure of how much of intentionality I would ascribe to the machine, because it's also my job. I know exactly what the machine can do and cannot do, because maybe I know the person who programmed it, so I'm aware of the range of possible actions that the machine has, but still, the moment I am trying to do something with the machine, being it just moving one block from left to right, I'm still trying to understand what the machine is doing. And I don't know whether it's something that I apply to the machine just because I'm just not used to not applying it, whether it's necessary or not, whether in 5 years I would still be doing it, but I'm still trying to figure it out.
I see.
Right? So I don't think the machine has intentionality, but I'm still recruiting the same kind of processes to interact with it.
I see.
It's very inefficient and a waste of my cognitive energy, but I think I'm doing it. And many people do it, and that's why it's so odd to interact with machines, because you forget that they are not intentional agents. Like, it's very easy to forget, let's say. Yeah.
So, yeah, you have this interesting thing where if you interact with machines enough, the line can be blurred.
Yeah.
And that's also true of softwares with GPT and things like that. But there's also a point where you can be made aware again, and then maybe you're inferring the intentions of the human being who created the machine, sort of the human behind the machine. And so there, you know that a human built it, it's in a particular environment. I can probably very quickly assume if a machine is supposed to swim or drive on a road, because there's still human parts. So I'm making an inference based on how the human designed the machine of what the machine is supposed to do. A machine that has legs runs. A machine that's just an arm doesn't run. So I guess in that sense, maybe I'm also, I don't like to use or think about much the role of intentions. So I'm definitely with you on that. But I think there is probably something where a human is attempting to understand the human behind the machine, and maybe the ghost of entropy behind the human, or whatever it is, if we don't have free will. But so then there's an interesting line there, or gradient there, where if we consider a human interacting with a robot arm, something like joint action, what about a pacemaker that I have installed on my heart? So I know what the pacemaker does. I know the intention behind the individual who created the pacemaker. We both have the joint goal of me continuing to function. I don't pump my own heart, but I, as a system, pump my heart. Is that a joint action? Is a Neuralink implanted in my brain a joint action for me to, have some kind of motor function?
I mean,
or a prosthetic limb as well, right?
One that moves automatically. Yeah, not a tool, because a hammer I wouldn't consider a joint action. But this is something that is performing a function that was programmed separate from me, and I do not control the function of. Yeah.
I think that the crucial part that makes it not a joint action is that I have no control over the action there is no possibility of agency for me with respect to my pacemaker.
Fair. Really good point.
That's what makes it not a joint action. But if I have a prosthetic that is adaptive to my muscle activity or my joint activity, and I can co-regulate its functioning while walking or using it, or I can learn how to use it in a way that it optimizes the support, for example, I could totally see me eventually thinking that I'm interacting with my prosthetic limb, and not because I'm delusional, right? Just because there is this predictive adaptive dynamic between me and the other agent. And as long as there is prediction and adaptation, I think our brain is kind of tricked into seeing an interaction there. And in fact, some prosthetics are extremely intelligent. So intelligent in the sense that they are able to learn, predict, and react in appropriate ways. That feature of the prosthetics makes it more and more of an agent than a tool. Then I wouldn't call it an agent in a proper sense, because there are other aspects. But yeah,
that's what I actually thought that you were going to, because a pacemaker for me. I think I'm not a doctor, obviously, but the idea would be that your heart would be functionally normally, and then if something goes wrong, and then it activates, and then just like kind of put you under rhythm again. So there is an interaction there. But I think that's exactly what you just said. And when I said about the prosthetic limb as well, it's that thing that the level of interaction is very, very. It's not a conscious level of interaction and where you're making decisions and nothing like that, but your body is interacting, right?
I think there is, one aspect of interactions that that puts together a real interaction and an interaction with a tool is this temporal contingency. We are tricked into thinking that if something is systematically temporally contingent to my behavior, then it must be interactive. And in fact, we are really good at picking up these sensory motor contingencies in the environment, right? So, and arguably some of the recruited mechanisms to pick up the sensory motor contingencies of social interactions or interactions with human agents are maybe very similar to or maybe the same mechanisms that you have to implement for coordinating with a prosthetic limb, right? So that temporal contingency you pick up with the same cognitive processes. So it feels like an interaction because in fact what you're doing is the same, obviously to a degree, and obviously, I mean, let's say the part that I really think it's necessary for calling it a coordinated action or a joint action is your agency. If you remove your agency as the subject, then I don't think I would call it a joint action.
So you have something like a brain-computer interface, like Neuralink, or even something that's not invasive, where you are performing the action and then it is responding based on sort of the neural activity it's getting. So there's an interesting gradient there, I guess. And maybe what we can think of is like the best of technologies either are things that we then incorporate into our own schema, our own body schema. So if a neural implant is so good that I forget it's there, then it's just part of me. And if a prosthetic is so good, I don't think of it as an other, I think of it as part of myself, then it's ideal. And in the same way, a human-robot interaction, if I'm interacting with a robot and I forget that it's a robot, and I think that it's a social thing, like a social animal, then it's a success. So maybe this sort of the ability for the idea that technology is technology and that it is instead just organic material like everything else, that's probably maybe a goal or a success of machines.
I think that's definitely a goal, but I want to send the ball back to you saying exactly the opposite. So if a robot acted like a human, really, truly like a human, would it really be the kind of robot you want to interact with?
Absolutely not.
Right. Oh, maybe, question mark, question mark. I just put it there. So imagine instead a robot that you always know it's a robot. It doesn't mimic human behavior. It doesn't mimic human likeness. It's not anthropomorphic necessarily or only partially anthropomorphic. It retains some machine-like behavior because it's easy for you to identify it. But it's functionally supportive of your behavior. I mean, it's functionally able to implement coordination in a good enough way. Right? I don't know. It's a question.
I answered thinking about not me very personally, but as a goal of having machines in general. Yeah. So I don't think having machines that are replicas of apes is a good goal because we already have other ways to make more apes. Yeah,
true. Good point. And also, sorry, I think also that, it's very unlikely that machines are going to be able to act even, the least cooperative ape is better as a coordination partner than any of the machines that we currently have designed. So it's like what you see in Boston Dynamics is not real. It's not live. It's not interactive. That fluid behavior is not. It hasn't been implemented in a cobot at all ever. Because in order for you to perceive that kind of fluidity and smoothness and human likeness and organic biological feeling, it needs to be adaptive, reactive to you in very, very fast and very flexible ways that just simply don't exist.
What about the large language models then?
Yeah, sure. Right, exactly. So when you remove the body, everything changes. When you don't need to deal with the looks and the physical experience, we are also way more exposed to artificial behavior that is in the form of a software or in the form of a non-embodied agent. We have plenty of experiences with it, and we are definitely far more down the line in creating human likeness there than with physical robots. and whether maybe, I mean, should we also maybe stop trying to make robots that look or act like humans? I don't know. I mean, I'm serious. I thought I had more clarity about these topics before starting to work on it, obviously. And then after working on it for a while, I am reconsidering, just because maybe that is not what we need.
Yeah, and one first point of clarification, the it that you're referring to is that you've worked on human-robot interaction with very high-end research-made robots.
Yeah.
Just to qualify that.
Yeah, sorry.
No, yeah, of course. Yeah, and the interesting thing is, so one of the things that we would like to think as humans is that our cognition is so special. But really, we've shown that you can actually create software that mimics cognition better than we can create physical things that mimic our motor function, which seems initially more trivial. And if you asked me 70 years ago, I would have said, of course, in 2020, we will have a physical robot that can mimic human function, but there's no way you can get a software to mimic a human brain. But the exact opposite is true, is that physics is a much harder problem than mentalization.
And I want to qualify that, because physical interaction doesn't mean that the problem is the physicality of the interaction only. Because the ways in which social interactions are complex is they are complex in content, obviously, but they're also complex in implementation. These multiple levels of complexity of how we interact with each other is not merely a physical challenge. Of course, there are physical aspects to it. It's the materials that we use, they're really important. Like if you have money to create, new materials that are extremely flexible, you will have immediately a better looking behavior. It will look biological much faster, right? That's okay. That's very basic. Although it's a big problem for a lot of, of the industry, the ability to produce this kind of new materials without incredibly high costs. But let's go beyond the physicality of it. Coordinating and interacting, in a smooth way, it's really something hard to model. And basically that's it. What's the model? What's a good model? In order for a machine to do it, you need a model. Even the most if you simplify the model to the point that the machine can handle it, that behavior is no longer the smooth and fluid interaction that you are used to, and therefore you won't be fooled. It doesn't feel like it. It doesn't work as well. It's not functional that much. So
even for some things that for me seems like that we have a pretty straightforward model, we seem to be struggling with what I have in mind is the struggle to get complete autonomous self-driving car, for example. So we should mimic the way that we drive, which we know.
Well, it's a coordination problem.
But still we struggle.
Yeah, right? But that's basically you're
her
going
point.
Exactly where I'm going, because driving is not a task that you do alone. To be a good driver, you need to be good at coordinating. It's very hard.
We have really good self-driving cars that navigate spaces.
Yeah,
on their own.
Exactly.
Yeah, like that problem we solved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So any agent you put in that environment where the car is great at navigating will reduce the performance of that car like 50% instantaneously.
Yeah, ironically, especially when it's another car.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, coordination is a bigger challenge than it looks. It looks trivial, like just move a couch, from A to B, but there is a lot there that is much that we don't know, and even the things we know, they are not very good. We don't have good cognitive models or good theories for them. I think the research in psychology or cognitive science, cognitive neuroscience has said a lot and is saying a lot on the motor processes, the perceptual processes, the way we can integrate these. in order to do predictions and adaptations. I think we know a lot about that. But, the interaction is a script, complex script that can change, take any turn, any time, even in the most constrained environments. Even when when we were saying before, you just need to remove a lot of the coordination challenges or the ambiguities. Even when you reduce them to the bone, people are still very unpredictable. And we react very flexibly, and that flexibility in social interactions is something quite unique, I must say.
Yeah, and again, it's the complexity of the social motor interaction that is particularly unpredictable, in that any social conversational interaction an artificial intelligence can adapt to quite quickly. But there's something about the complexity of an agent's movement in physical space and coordinating with that agent in physical space that is particularly constraining in terms of our ability to model. And that's quite interesting, because you can have an excellent fluid conversation with something with an artificial intelligence, but then you try to move the couch with that thing, and it's not going to work for a very particular set of reasons. And I guess that's what's so interesting about that question cognitively.
But also, let's say you have a very fluid interaction, verbal interaction, conversation with an AI, and then you ask the AI to try to figure out, based on what you just said, what you're gonna do.
Oh, I haven't tried that. That's quite interesting.
So that's, I think, what puts together that's what gives you, the way I think about it, the complexity of a physical and social interaction.
Right.
Have you seen the presentation of the ChatGPT 4.0?
No, but I read that Scarlett Johansson was very pissed off because they stole her voice. But that's the only thing
That's true.
Yes,
that's really true.
Yeah, that's the only thing I know.
That hit the news.
Wow, it just came to my mind right now. Yes, it is.
Apparently they asked for her voice. She refused, and they basically faked it
changed
again.
it slightly.
Yes.
Yeah.
They don't have to ask anything
from
anyone.
Exactly.
It's all.
But I didn't see the presentation. No.
So they have. I watched it, and there was one segment. So they are showing different ways that you can use the new model. And,
it stands for Omni, because it does a lot of different things in a lot of different domains.
And one of them is they put like two phones, one on the side of each other, with two different agents, two chats talking to each other.
Okay.
And what they did is just one of them could have access to the camera, and the other one would not. And they ask one ChatGPT to describe to the other one what they were seeing. Seemed to go quite well. There was like a good description, and the other one understands. So the person presenting asked the one that could not see, so what do you think that it looks like, and so on. So that looks a lot like a coordination problem, right? I don't know. I am suspicious. I have been using ChatGPT, and it has been infuriating me a lot of times.
But what infuriates you the most?
just plain logic.
Right.
Just plain logic. It's
machines should be smarter than that, shouldn't they?
Yeah. So yeah. I think there is some. I already discussed with Johan about that, and we both agreed that a large language model was made for a specific purpose, which is passing the Turing test.
Mm-hmm.
So the other purposes are not there.
Yeah.
When there is a human evaluating how good it is to kind of direct the self-learning, the creation of weights within the system. So. And when the humans say this is good, this is not good, you are teaching the machine what is good. And what they taught the machine is how to pass the Turing test.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have anything to do with having be able to apply logic as a human do. So that's what infuriates me the most. Just most of the time, that's what I struggle with. But
maybe it's fine to teach the machine, right?
Yes,
I think it's fine.
Yeah, we teach kids. I guess the hope is that because the machine, in terms of formal logic, like predicate calculus, machine is excellent.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of formal logic. And I guess the logic you're talking about is this sort of like dynamic, applies to everything, reasoning.
Inferential, yeah.
Yeah, inferential that can also represent the types of goals that we want. And I think that that's the difficult thing, right?
Yeah,
is
that we want as humans.
That we want as humans.
Exactly, but that's why we need to teach.
Completely
we need to
agree.
be the teachers.
Yes.
It's fine.
Like we need to put the goals in. But the inferences are actually, it's good when it understands what a human goal is, but it wouldn't necessarily infer a goal that it doesn't have the elements of the goal to be able to put together. Like we construct goals because we have the elements of different goals, and we can say, I didn't think that they would want to do this, but I can get why they would want to do this. It makes sense.
But that's goes really back to what I think the test would be. You know, we talked about it, machine. ChatGPT, tell me now what I will do, right? What do you think my preferences are? But will I act on my how will I act on my preferences? Maybe the answer, what are my preferences, could be correct. But will I actually act on my preferences, or how are my preferences going to change depending on context? How is my goal informed by the fact that I'm very tired because today I woke up too early and I didn't have enough, all of the things that actually affect our behavior and our decisions. I mean, that's not only a problem of predictive ability. It's just that they cannot get that information only from linguistic interaction that does not have a pedagogical function, I think.
And here's the really interesting thing, right? Is that GPT can predict very easily the lowest level needs and the highest level needs. Right. It can say as a human, you're going to eat, you need sleep, you need to take a shit, whatever. It has the highest level needs too, in that it's like, you think family is important.
Of course.
And you have, you're trying to mitigate an existential crisis or whatever it is. You like meaning. But it's everything in the middle that is a really hard thing. And that's the secret sauce of human life of every day.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the most interesting things that is a hard problem, because it can mimic the ability to understand meaning and what it means to not grasp meaning. This is like one of the earliest things I tried, is like, write me a story about somebody going through an existential crisis. And it writes a pretty good story, right? Because that story's been written before and it's easy to understand. But and it can even give you like a good slice of life, because it can give you like the action somebody's performing. But the moment, two characters might have to interact based on backstory, I mean, it gets a bit difficult. Because it can just repeat what's been said before.
Exactly. I mean, I guess we all continuously repeat what's been done before, in a way. So we are not that crazy and that unpredictable, but there is a degree of flexibility. I think flexibility is key. To our behavior.
Well, there's a difference that we repeat things that we have experienced, and the AI actually use what is available in the internet.
Yeah,
there has been said in the internet.
Yeah,
so it's a specific environment.
Yeah, totally. It's getting bigger every day.
Yes,
but it is a specific.
It's very, for sure. And it's only a sub-segment of the internet, because a lot of parts of the internet, probably for the good, are blocked off.
Yes,
true. That's true.
Yeah,
but and that's this reminds me of another point, is that I think human beings are going to try. One thing I can predict, because I'm a human, maybe a robot wouldn't be able to predict, is that we are going to try to mimic something that can be a physical stand-in for human beings really well, because of how much despite the fact that we can create more apes, when we create an ape, that ape has a universe inside of its head and has its own goals that are also unpredictable. And if we can recreate the image and likeness of an ape such that interacting with that ape is more predictable in a way, particularly if I want those interactions to always be positive, then I think that's going to have a huge application, in the same way that people are using softwares.
But then why do you need the likeness of the ape?
I don't think that I think that a lot of people aren't going to want that, myself included, and I think all of us not. But I think there's also it's going to be proportionally small, but number large, economically important, fiscally important, of people who would want a social partner that is a robot.
And it's all about power.
Care for the elderly.
You have a complete control over something that looks like something that you usually do not have control
only if
over.
you call uncertainty mitigation power, which I'm not ready to debate necessarily. Like, I could say that that's an interesting thing to discuss, which I'd be down. But yeah, because then we take a big left turn. But this would be just to mitigate uncertainties, like caring for the elderly, right? But then people who are feeling lonely. If we continue along this like highly capitalist individualist trajectory, you're going to need more and more social robots because everybody's going to live in the box, you know. But aside from that, you're also going to have. I mean, this is why I thought of this. We create like sex dolls that are incredibly have the likeness, you know, and then we also create like sex doll softwares. At some point, somebody's going to want to put those things together, you know. And so, like, this is also, it's just interesting, like the different ways human beings are going to try to replicate human beings for different reasons. But the reason to have a humanoid robot which can pass the Turing test, which mimics human thoughts and also human movements, I think is still a huge draw, which is not something I prefer, but I think it is still a big draw.
I think I agree that people are really, really still there. And I say still in the sense that from a scientific point of view, I mean, scientific as a very generic term. Let's say from an academic research point of view, that's first not possible because there is no university rich enough to do that kind of research without any industry or company, fueling in some cash. From an academic point of view, that's not interesting. Like having a replica of anthropomorphic of humanoid robot in our room that talks like us and think like us, it's not the goal of robotics research, I think. And I agree with it.
It's a good sell.
Exactly. But it's
not the main goal.
Yes, it's a good sell, and that's how people decide to fund some of this research, and that's how, in these huge conferences, robotics conferences, you get the most, people visiting your stand, and then that's how you get the most views on YouTube. That's how you get the most money. When you have those kind of low-hanging fruits. But from the point of view of robotics research in the cognitive domain, I think that's really not the point.
Yeah.
And of course, there is a lot of research in robotics that is not cognitive, right? So that's a totally different. I'm not that expert, and but I'm sure that. Those that take care of the mechanics or the materials or even the software parts or any of those domains are even less interested in the humanoid guy that brings you coffee in the morning and asks you how was the night, right? It's us, the psychologists or the people that revolve around psychology that are interested in that kind of experience. Not you, I know. Not me either, by the way. But still, I think that the fetish comes more from our side of the research than from the actual engineering aspect, engineering field.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is that this is kind of the divide between the engineer and the scientist, in that the engineer builds things that you can physically interact with. Yeah. And I think that that's innately appealing because an interaction is kind of cool when humans have created that thing that you interact with. Yeah. But scientists are more interested in generating novel ideas to mentally interact with and grapple with, and that not everybody necessarily wants to do. Yeah. But that's definitely, I think, the main distinction of why the three of us are scientists and not engineers.
But I must say that there is some interest actually in, at least according to my reading and the research that I've done in the stuff that has been published lately, in trying to model something like mind reading in machines. Mind reading not in the linguistic sense, mind reading in the real life sense.
Or the psychic sense.
Exactly. Or the psychic sense, which in the end, for some people, is the same. So,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah. So, for example, I think that a lot of people would want to see a machine that is able to pass even implicit theory of mind tests. And I would be one of them, by the way.
Yeah, for sure.
So I would be interested in seeing that. Just because that would tell us a lot about what we understand of theory of mind, ourselves. I mean, how good our models are of that cognitive capacity, rather than how cool the robot would be. But
yeah, that's true. I think I should correct myself that there is this gain on trying to modeling into non-wet material the cognitive functions. But yeah, it always seems that it's actually a gimmick of it. So it's always like it does something that looks like that. But
if you accept that some birds can pass first level implicit theory of mind tests, if you are one of the people that doing research on theory of mind that accept that kind of recent data, and you accept that theory of mind is not the theory of mind that we used to think of, back in the 90s and whatever, then it's interesting. It's interesting to see a machine that can pass it, because it means that you, as a cognitive scientist, have modeled the stimuli, not the stimuli as in the experimental stimuli, but the social cues in a very good way. It means you really came to identify with precision what are the cues that can be used to make those inferences.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think at least for me, that's interesting.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well,
yeah.
I believe there is more than one way to process information and then get the same output. So it's interesting, nevertheless.
Yeah, because the interesting thing there, obviously, but it's the fact that the human was able to model the robot to react to the human. So you would have to have a general understanding of the cues that are important, put those cues into the robot, and then the robot is perceiving them and acting accordingly. Yeah. Just to clarify that. And also just a simple definition of mind reading is something like it doesn't actually, you don't need to have any type of validation from the individual whose mind you're reading, in air quotes. It's just the ability to represent somebody else's goals, what you believe to be somebody else's goals internally. So it's like always nested in the individual doing the mind reading.
Yeah, of course. And sorry, I used mind reading in a bit of a without specifying.
Yeah.
I wanted to switch a little bit though, because I think there is something that is interesting for me, and I believe that is interesting for you right now. Maybe it was more in the past, which is the what's the source of the motivational aspect of joint action or coordination? So why do we want to do that at all?
Good point. Yes. Yeah. Why? I don't know. There are so many reasons not to do it.
Yes.
No, I'm joking. I mean, depends on what you have to do, but yes. No, I come from more evolutionary perspective on things, so I'm thinking comparatively. So no, I'm very interested in that. As I was saying at the very beginning, when you asked me what is a good social interaction, what is a good joint action, I really think that what's good about it, it's also something that is rewarding us in ways that individual actions are not. And I think that this is reflected in people motivation to engage in this type of activities, although it's not always efficient, good, doesn't pay off neither now nor in in the next day or in the next interaction, or maybe there won't be an next interaction. So motivation is always it's a good way of putting it. I always use the term reward because I try to think about it in a formalized way, in a sense of thinking of what are the expected outcomes and the costs that individuals are willing to pay for those expected outcomes. This is not my way of seeing it. It's just the way that a lot of theory has been written, I think, in psychology and cognitive science in general, to explain how people decide things. So, but in the end, the way these rewards and expected outcomes create wanting behavior, I would call it the reward of those outcomes. And those rewards, for a lot of coordinated action and joint actions, are not that clearly instrumental, or they are not clearly, it's not easy to measure them in terms of payoff. So.
And what are they?
Yeah, so there are obviously a lot of advantages that, as you know, you study evolution, so I don't need to specify the evolutionary side of it. But of course, there is a huge advantage as a species to select certain behaviors that are, that will increase group fitness and individual fitness. And we know that altruism and cooperation are exactly that. So, for sure, as a species, there are drives of behavior that can explain somehow some of our preferences. But I think I like to think about the more here and now scenarios where people really need to decide from the moment to another one whether to engage in such activities. And by that I mean whether they need to cooperate or whether they choose to cooperate even when they do not need it, right? And in those cases, obviously, there is predispositions, there are personality traits, there is context, there is, the energetic resources that someone has, there are all of those things. But all of those things being equal, why do people do things together when they don't have to? Colloquially, we could say they like it, right? Well, what does it mean that they like it? You like smoking. Smoking is not good for you. You like money. Money is not good per se. It's only good as insofar as it allows you to do something else. So why do we like doing things together in that sense of liking? And I don't have the answer, but I have thought for a long time about how to model it or how to test it, in a sense. So what could be a good hypothesis of why we like to do things together even when we don't have to? And one hypothesis that I have that I've been trying to test, but I'm not that satisfied with where I got so far, so I would like to test it more, is that by engaging in activities with others that you don't have to engage in, basically you are giving yourself learning opportunities. So learning opportunities about the interaction with others that you otherwise wouldn't, the knowledge that you gain from active interaction with others, it's not gainable in any other way. So, and learning coordination from a theoretical point of view or from the experience of it is very different. So maybe there is a drive to just take all the chances that we have to coordinate with others, because that's how we learn to be good partners, good cooperation partners. And there are a lot of things that are advantageous about learning about cooperation, right, and coordination in general. Not only you become a good coordination partner, but you understand who is a good coordination partner and who isn't. But then, not all the things that we do for learning are that much fun, right? We do learn things also when they're not very enjoyable. We do have to learn things in setups that are not that enjoyable. So it remains somewhat a question mark also in my head. What is the enjoyable side of it? Yeah, there's from my perspective, theoretically, an intrinsic reward to curiosity in general, in that, like, in the same way. So the way I view it is that biological life has some kind of imperative
in the long term to mitigate uncertainties. And learning then allows us to mitigate those uncertainties in the long term. So then examples of this are like, many species play fight with their siblings, dolphins surf, human beings. So we do this like play to learn, and maybe it's just that social interaction in that sense, cooperation in that sense, allows us to have this passive reward of learning through social interaction, things that are not necessarily explicit in the same way that you're not, when two lion cubs are play fighting, they're not like, I'm going to practice my left jab. They just do the thing, and then there's a passive learning. And maybe we're just kind of building that in the same way that we might practice a whole bunch of motor learnings. We're also practicing social learnings. Yeah,
I mean, I really like this angle of the intrinsic reward of curiosity and being involved in uncertain, environments that are uncertain to a point that makes them interesting and not risky, right? So if you interact there is a risk to interacting with others, obviously, but if you engage with others in situations where there aren't stakes, then also the risk becomes, it's mitigated, and what you can lose is much less than what you can gain, obviously. So the gaining is experience in these uncertain environments, which are usually a bit threatening, in fact, individually. And one question is whether it's uncertain in uncertain scenarios you are more drawn to cooperating or coordinating with others, or whether in uncertain scenarios you are more you prefer to rely on your own resources. That's like a very big question in policy, I think. And I don't think it's something we really know about our preferences. And one thing is to think about this at the economic level, and I think there is a lot of behavioral research studying this in scenarios where people are either losing or winning money, which is a very well established methodology and a paradigm that it's been already used in policy making a lot, anyways. But I think there is interest in me, at least, in investigating situations where it's not the instrumental payoff that is the stake, right? When it's the social exchange that is at stake, the reward or the cost of the interaction itself that we are about to either gain or pay, and how that influences decisions in the face of uncertainty. Because, as you say, uncertainty is something we want to mitigate in the end, ultimately, but it's also something that drives our interest.
Yeah, for sure.
In and of itself. So
we have we can think of uncertainty as a gradient, and everybody, I think, on every human being has a different threshold, but nobody wants to be at either extreme, where they're only in a room and they never move and everything's the same. That actually produces psychosis. Like if you're in a sensory deprivation chamber, it shows that it's basically a sensory deprivation chamber. It mitigates every possible uncertainty because they feed you, they give you water, you have a toilet, but nothing changes and people go mad. And at the exact opposite, if everything is uncertain, that can induce panic, anxiety. So everybody's sort of in the middle, where we have some uncertainty, but not too much. There's sort of this Goldilocks range. But where everybody is in that range is different. Like you said, some people don't necessarily want risky social interactions. Other people invite really intelligent people on a podcast and record a podcast every once in a while, even though we might say something stupid. And so there's that, there's that.
And some other people accept the invitation.
And so that it's interesting to go through the world navigating it, understanding that everybody's at a different place. And I think that poses some really interesting problems, like you said, for how we build policy into a place. Into a system. But I'm going to also reference, you touched upon like a really important part of Guilherme's research, which I'm going to plug on right now, because Guilherme's looking at like an interaction where just jump in anytime, but this is I think to me what was the most interesting bit about what you were saying in the overlap of what I see with Guilherme's work is when two individuals are engaging in a game where there's money at stake, one has information, the other one doesn't, individuals might choose to defer a choice about money distribution. And the interesting thing is, some of Guilherme's findings also show that the money isn't the only reward. People want to be seen as not being jerks. People want to maintain like a positive social. Am I being observed? Versus am I making choices in a vacuum? What is this person going to think of me? So there's all these different social rewards that people are accounting for that are distinct and possibly outweigh oftentimes the degree of reward that one might get fiscally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Totally. I mean,
is that a fair representation?
I had no idea you were doing this research.
No, that's super nice to hear someone else is explaining my research.
Good work. I like the work.
But yeah,
you should make him write your abstract.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. But yeah, that was a good explanation of it, and it seems that I just found utility somewhere else, which is on. I can put it in different ways. There's more research to be done. There's other things to be tested, specifically on how utility is found on voluntary deference, or when I think a good one that Owen laid down was just saving face. So you're taught through your life or you build your own identity as this kind of person that behaves in this kind of way. Mm-hmm. So you don't want it to be seen as something opposite to that image that you were taught that is the right one, that you build yourself to believe that is the right one. So you conserve it. Mm-hmm. You just want it not to be seen as selfish.
Yeah.
And there's value there.
Totally.
That just trumps the value of the monetary reward. I use money, but it can be anything.
Yeah, totally. I mean, reputation
management,
is crucial, and I think this identity aspect that you touched upon is interesting, and I haven't thought about it before. This idea.
Yeah, that's where Johan should have entered already.
Okay. Yeah, this aspect of the person that I think I am. Or that I want to be, and the way that this is confirmed or disconfirmed in my social interactions is for sure a huge drive to interact, right? Mm-hmm. Or a huge drive away from interaction, depending on the level of anxiety or uncertainty that I feel around myself. Mm-hmm. And I haven't, I haven't thought about the relevance of how I perceive myself in the decision. I
thought quite a while about that, because what happened is just that what was puzzling me was that there would be an alternative explanation, which would be just like a social strategy. So if I'm not being selfish with you now, I can rely on you in the future for next interactions. But my experiment, and this is specifically, there was no way to predict there would be next interactions or what kind of next interaction that would be.
Yeah.
So it kind of a bet on a social reciprocity.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it makes more sense that they are saving face in relation to something that they believe that they are. They believe that they're perceived as. They want to be perceived as. Instead of trying to manipulate. I am not so sure. I still have to run experiments, but I got puzzled by that. So I gave more thought on idea that they are imagining how they're supposed to act.
I think it's a very common criticism to to empirical research that tries to measure, these decision scenarios and try to capture biases or preferences that are deviating from this very pure utility functions, where previous research has already embedded all of the relevant biases, right? Like future reciprocation, check. Reputation management, check. Whatever. Cost minimization, check. All of these are already part of the function, right? And in theory, it has already been explained. One of these might always explain decisions if you want to look far enough in the future or far back enough in individuals' behavior. But I find that criticism a bit, dull, because you can't just assume that people do not have other kinds of preferences. I mean, we haven't just exhausted the reasons why people do things. Otherwise, we would have finished psychology. I mean, it's like we would have closed the book. But we didn't. So I'm happy to hear that they criticize you this way, because back in the days, I think they criticized me the same way. Maybe the same person criticized us. Who knows? But I mean, I was hypothesizing a sort of social, reward of cooperation and coordination per se, like referring to something close to intrinsic reward in the the neuroscience sense of intrinsic, like pure reward, not money, like not
physiologic.
Like things that attract you for the fact that they are pleasurable, not for the
actual
fact that
molecules binding to some
pleasure. Music gives direct pleasure. It's not a primary need, but it's pleasurable. Art is pleasurable. All of these things we can live without, but our brain responds to them in very similar ways. It responds to food and, I don't know, maternal care, that level. So if we accept that high forms of social cultural products can give us pleasure, then I think social interaction gives people pleasure in a similar way, and it's not really groundbreaking what I'm saying. It's just that trying to explain people's decisions in a experimental setup where there is money at stake and people seem to prefer to lose money over the possibility of interacting with others has caused me criticisms. So I'm happy that you encountered similar problems and you overcome them, actually. Yes.
It's still there is still some stuff to be done.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good work sort of centering beliefs, and you can think of beliefs just as the goals individuals maintain, the information they store about outcomes in their environment, things like that. But looking at utility, understanding utility, and even redefining what rationality is in a very subjective, belief-centric, goal-contingent way, where the only way to understand why human behaves the way they behave is to understand all of their motivations. And as such, if they're acting in line with their motivations, which probably they are in any given moment, an individual is probably always acting rationally, as long as we understand rationality is just the thing human behavior does to justify. Which is interesting because then it converges on the colloquial use of rationale, which is my justification.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. And also, I mean, if it's a better predictive model of people behavior, then it should be used, right?
Exactly.
I mean, just utilitarian motivation here. Why shouldn't we consider people's motivation if they are actually what drives their behavior? Obviously, we need to deal with the fact that there is a heterogeneity. This is a very difficult word. Anyways, an heterogeneous pool of motivations, and you can, I mean, it's harder for that more people would converge on the same set than they would probably converge on a set of biases and preferences that are a bit more generic. So yes, in that sense, there is more inter-individual differences with respect to the list of their motivations for doing things, but that's not a reason to walk away from trying to figure them out. I think it's the opposite.
Please.
I was just thinking. You mentioned when I mentioned the evolutionary perspective on the thing, you said you know that there will be advantages on prosociality.
Yeah.
Still, the prosociality comes with some other drawbacks, which is just you can be exploited, right? So,
Totally.
So there is this paradigm still going on. That's why people are still researching prosociality and cooperation and coordinations. Otherwise, we would have closed the book.
Yeah, totally. And I think I actually started from the costs of cooperation, and I ended up realizing that only if you assume. Only if I assumed in my model that there was an extra reward somewhere there, it would make sense.
So you could afford free riders.
Yes.
If you were still satisfied
you could afford free riders. You could afford uncertainty of outcome. In my case, that was my problem, because all of the coordination games and tasks that I was coming up with would. People were terrible at it, doing it together. They were losing so much. They were terrible. It's like you have a video game where you can choose to win it and get all the money, or basically take twice amount of time and get half of the points. Why would you go for it, right?
Yeah.
So, and for me, I kept on trying to figure out, okay, so in this situation, they are giving away the certainty of the outcome. They're literally not sure they will finish the game, while they could finish it by themselves. So why are they giving away all of this, the certainty?
Because they have an intrinsic reward on doing it together.
Yes.
But then I haven't finished my question. My question was, so there must have been evolutionary pressure to lead to that. So to the point that we have reward on coordination, cooperation, joint action, that compensates for free riding or exploitation, we would have to have a condition for the physiological, the intrinsic reward of cooperation to emerge, right? Because we don't see in other animals unless they are asocial, ill-social, sorry, and or in very specific contexts, right? So what do you think could be an evolutionary pressure for a great ape like us to lead to intrinsic reward on social interaction that doesn't exist? This other species didn't get to this evolutionary pressure.
Well, there is an argument for the evolutionary pressure for selecting cooperation and altruism being supportive of the ability to do collective hunting and basically collective child rearing and all of those practices and collective foraging, all of those practices that ultimately...
what do you think it would be?
I don't know. I mean, it's a big question because I'm not an evolutionary psychologist and I have hard times talking about... I mean, I don't want to say wrong things.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
But for me,
I'm not looking for the right answer. It's just curious.
I think it's learning. For me, I think it's social learning. That's the drive. And, I mean, it actually pans out if you look at social learning literature and you realize, I mean, a lot of the mechanisms that are involved in social learning into scenarios are actually cognitive mechanisms that you need to recruit when you are doing coordination with others.
So we come back to learning, the same thing that we were talking before. What do you think about teaching then?
I think teaching is a very interesting case of joint action, and people would kill me for that.
No, but I said that many times to them, and I still saying to them. But
I mean, teaching is a kind of asymmetric joint action where there is an individual goal of knowledge transfer, and sometimes there is a goal of knowledge acquisition, but most times not, in fact. So, I mean, I'm thinking of situations where, not formalized teaching, where the kid needs to walk into the class and learn and wanting to learn. I'm thinking of all of the informal teaching situations that are actually the 90% of the learning that we do. And they all involve at least 2 people. They all involve some level of physical coordination, even if it's only, sharing a space and deciding what's our orientation, spatial orientation, or what's our perspective. And it involves interacting with tools, and that's also fundamental, moving objects around and passing objects to each other, showing object functions. All of this can be interpreted as a coordination problem. Problem in the sense like case of coordination. So, and in coordination scenarios, so let's say that, for example, emulation is like a big important mechanism that takes place in teaching interactions. And that's also necessary if you want to coordinate properly. You need to understand that the outcome of actions is independent from the specific implementation. If you don't get that point, you will never generalize anything of the coordination interaction as well. And I mean, I actually had the opportunity to work with researchers that were at CEU before on these topics of the overlap between the cognitive processes that are necessary or recruited for social interaction and coordination, and those that are recruited for social learning. And, we discussed a lot, and it was very interesting, and I got sort of convinced about many things. I think the case of teaching, it's still a bit hard to, I think me and you agree, but this wouldn't be a mainstream view on the topic at all.
I know.
So I think, but if you implement teaching in a real scenario, for example, you need to teach a robot something, then it would be very interesting to test this hypothesis, because there you really need to choose the signals and you need to choose the mechanism that you put in the head of the robot, in order to interpret the signal. You need to code it, right? You need to choose, is it simulation? Is it emulation?
You have to do air quotes and mention it, because we also have the podcast, the audio.
Right, air quotes, sorry. Yes, you need to decide whether you are making the robot an imitator, an emulator, a reactive, an adaptive, a predictive, And it would be cool. Yeah. But I don't think it's going to be done by anybody anytime soon. So we have time to get some money from the Austrian government and do it ourselves.
That's true.
Yes.
You know what's interesting is that dogs, right?
Good dogs.
And the reward on the interaction between a dog and a human, it's so
obvious.
Obvious, right?
Yes.
And everybody say like, well, there's pleasure in just interacting, just doing it together.
Yeah.
And it's just like, yeah, come on, yeah, maybe, yes, okay. But when you look at a dog, it's just like, wow, there's so much joy on them, right?
Yes.
The joy is everywhere just to be around and just to do something together. Have you been interested in dogs?
No, but my son behaves like a dog. So he is very happy about any form of interaction. He's 10-month-old. Yeah. So I think there is
especially interaction with somebody with food.
Yeah, well, true. I do hope it's not only about food, but with dogs is always, you need to assume they hope for food, though. They always hope for food. I mean, my dogs at least. Maybe they didn't love me enough. But yes.
Okay. So do you think that's the primary motivation?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't. Also with my son, he's the evil. Yeah.
He's my adopted nephew.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and this maybe brings us back also to the sort of evolutionary argument, where there's so much where interacting with other human beings, being surrounded by other humans, mitigates so many environmental risks that those who got pleasure from it are the ones who probably got selected for. And that if you didn't get pleasure from social interaction,
because they learned more,
but also they were protected by other individuals.
And
So,
they are
like,
better coordination partners.
Yeah, they're better
they will be
coordination partners.
chosen.
You get more food, but then you also get the physical protection of the group, so you're insulated from physical threats. If you are one person roaming the savannah versus 50 people roaming the savannah, your likelihood of getting eaten by a lion is less.
Sure.
So in that sense, like, aside from there's learning for sure, I think that's probably the primary, but then you also have the fact that you are getting positive rewards from physical interaction. It means that you're also more physically adjacent, which I think also mitigates physical risk. And I think that's probably a big component of it, in that there are passive benefits, just contextual, that happen to be there. Like, you get this interesting trend where as the behavior of biological agents becomes more complex, as they get more complex behaviors and rewards, like really big rewards from other behaviors, like sexual activity becomes more physiologically salient. So that's quite interesting. So you get like the ones that survive are the ones that have pleasurable sex when non-pleasurable sex is an option, and so many pleasure from so many other aspects of the environment is there. And that's sort of an interesting thing where the ones that happen to get pleasure from social interaction get fringe benefits aside from the immediate benefits of learning. And I think that that's also quite interesting.
Yeah.
And this is maybe highlighted most in the human-robot interaction, with what you were saying of me trying to teach a robot something, means that I can only teach the robot aspects of the thing that I am able to represent. But when we teach so many things that are passive. We don't know that we're teaching that thing as well, but we're teaching it. It's the whole package. It's me doing this thing, and the fact that I'm doing this thing, not just having it being text in a book, makes a huge difference. But with the robot, it can only receive text in a book.
Yes.
Because I have to strip it of all the humanness and turn it into a logical statement, turn it into a proposition, and give that proposition to the robot. So there's going to be certain things where until a robot, and maybe they can, this is just my ignorance, but until you can get a synthetic agent to make its own environment-centric inferences, construct those around the information we give it, it's going to always be limited to being an on-paper representation of what humans can build. If the robot can say, oh, I'm a metal arm in physical space in a room humans have built, if the robot can get to that point, then it's a very sophisticated agent. But until then, it's a bunch of ones and zeros, and the limitations are our limitations of conveying information.
And I'm going to surprise you with telling you that actually teaching robots is often involved physically teaching. Like you take the robot
nice.
And you actually move it in space the way you want it to move later.
Nice.
Right? So that's the level of, that's how they learn.
It's like an Excel macro.
Yeah.
You do the thing, and it's just like, do this thing.
You move them around.
Nice.
You literally give them the haptic information and the trajectory. They can't do nothing by themselves, right? They wouldn't. I mean, you can tell them to move from A to B, but in order for the learning, I mean, robots have joints, like arm robots have joints like we have. Not all of them, but as number high enough of joints to need to practice how to control all the weights and the angles. And the only way they can learn from the get-go, when you turn it on literally, is to physically move it around.
Do it. Yeah. Phenomenal.
Yeah. I was also thinking, respect to what you said, that maybe there is something interesting about the co-evolution of the ability to tolerate proximity from of your conspecifics, and the ability or the interest in cooperative activities just for the fun of it. Because, I mean, I assume unless there is a dramatic reduction of the aggressive response to proximity, there can be no cooperation that just sparks spontaneously without any advantage to the group. And maybe there is people doing this research. I'm just not aware of it. But yeah.
I also work with the marmosets, right? So
Right.
the cooperative breeding
Yeah.
species, and they tolerate quite well proximity of other individuals when they are feeding. They share food,
Yeah.
and I'm curious to run some coordinate to get them to do
That would be
some
super
coordination problems. I think evolutionary, that's a interesting way to go.
Yeah.
And it has everything to do with proximity tolerance, social proximity, and the cooperative breeding. I think is an interesting case for evolutionary explanations of coordination.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fascinating, and you mentioned before as well, right? And it's just very. It's just quite like when I say humans doing it, it sounds quite unique. It is quite unique, right? Like raising a child with the village.
Yeah.
And I drift a little bit, but I didn't have a direct question, just a comment on what you commented.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's also some interesting work showing how the presence of an individual absent society can be, depending on the context, a threatening thing, or it can be a supportive thing. And there's some work looking at how if you're in a city, depending on your context, or you're hiking in the woods, and there's another person there, you're not quite sure if it's just you two, if that person is friend or foe. There's like a uncertainty there. But it's greatly mitigated when you're in the city because there's some kind of society there that's there to protect you from any potential negative intentions of the other person. But when you're in the wilderness, it's sort of a threat. Whereas, like, imagine you're in the wilderness and you need water and you're hungry and you see a person. All of a sudden, that person might seem like they're positive because there's something you can get out of it. So it's sort of like the context of what you have to gain, what you have to lose, and what that human agent and the complexity of what the human represents can mean for you in that moment. But if we have been recording for over an hour and a half, so I want to also give the opportunity to take a look at. I mean, I know on a personal note that you're also interested in policy. Mm-hmm. Would you be interested in talking about that, or you don't have to? We can also shift into something else.
I mean, I don't want to decide.
It is interesting for us.
Let's talk about whatever
you do.
Yeah.
In that, like, I guess my question would be, when you think about policy, is it informed by the research that you've done? Do you think that there are particular things that you have expertise in that could be beneficial from a policy standpoint that you'd like to see implemented?
Oh, well, no, that would be... I don't think that highly about my research. I mean, I'm not that confident.
Again, how can we change the world with joint action research?
Yeah.
Tell me.
No, I really don't think of my stuff that highly, but I'm interested. I'm more thinking of the way in which the methods from cognitive science can be useful in policy making, and I'm not making. I mean, it's definitely following a trend here, but it's a very interesting trend that I think it's not discussed enough in academic environments, at least not the academic environments that I have hanged out in. Now, this idea that, behavioral science and cognitive science has a lot to say about individuals' preferences, and not only preference, but really about their decision-making mechanisms and how to support decision-making, in fact. That's the thing that I find really interesting. We know how to make a decision difficult for people. We design experiments to make it very difficult for them to decide. Mm-hmm. Hence, we know how to make it easy, and how to deliver them information in a way that actually supports their understanding and supports their also their feeling of agency, which is always good, and feelings that you have made a decision that is informed, and this information has been delivered to you in a non manipulated way. All of these things are, I think, really big fears in people's approach to policy or to to political life in general, to social life in general, unless they're working in the field. And yeah, I would be interested in exploring that. And I think we already have the knowledge. It's just that it's not a very common thing to try to synthesize it for the purpose of supporting individuals' participation. And I don't have a good idea on how to do it, honestly. I just feel there is a potential there that is, that I would like to explore, but I haven't done yet. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. I think it's a great thing to be able to apply any of the things that we learned from doing scientific research to actually apply those to making changes in policy and how society is structured. Because I think that a lot of the perspectives that we gain from, especially when you're looking at human behavior, how information processing, how individual fears, individual motivations, how social interactions shape the way we look at the world.
Yeah.
There's so many ways to, I think, mitigate some of the pitfalls of the global society that we have, and some of the greatest risks that are posed to the most marginalized groups of the population.
Totally. I mean, I just recently read something about, there was this behavioral scientist working in marketing, giving a seminar on how to make people believe they still have taste in the world of algorithms.
They have taste?
That they still have their own personal taste.
Preferences, not like tongue.
No, sorry.
Not flavor.
Taste as in, taste
sense of
for
style.
Products and,
right.
How to make them feel they can still choose how to furnish their apartment or how to dress.
Okay.
That's like the evil side of cognitive science, if you will. I mean, a very capitalistic-oriented way of using our knowledge, right? We know that we are tricking people into having some preferences, but we still want them to feel agency over their preferences. Mm-hmm. So how do we make them believe it? Although we know that, in fact, they don't have that much, because we are all scrolling in our social media and someone else is choosing what kind of table we're buying for the kitchen, right? We know that. So that's like, it got stuck with me because that's obviously a really smart way to go about it. But let's not go I don't want to go in that direction because I find that a bit also too capitalistic. But what about making people understand why they have so much resistance, for example, to handle certain kind of information with respect to social events or political events? Why not make them make them more aware of their processes, cognitive processes and risk, fears and motivations when thinking about, climate change or pandemic or any of these majorly, dramatic events that happen in their lives on a daily basis, and how their cognitive biases or preferences or motivations influence the way they make decisions, politically speaking. Right?
Do you think, sorry.
No, please.
Do you think this kind of application could come from a private sector at all? Like anything related to profit making could?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think that public policy is the way to go, right? I think there is a lot of public policy informed by behavioral science in certain parts of the world. I think it has been already in place for maybe 10 years, a decade, something like this, mainly in the UK, I believe. And it's mainly people coming from the academia and deciding that, they can use this information for more social participation. Mm-hmm. Use this information to make people take part in the political process more. I don't want to say that there is no way that the private sector can influence positively people's understanding of reality. I think the private sector has, of course, a different interest in mind, and that's what decides their investments, but it doesn't have to all be, bad. You can imagine that there is some interest in fostering or supporting environmental awareness, for example, or human rights awareness. It's not all against capitalistic interest. It just depends on how you frame it. But yeah.
Do you think that the scale is an issue?
Scale?
Yes. So
what do you mean? I mean, I understand literally, but what do you have in mind?
The syndicalist comes out. That's
well, you can have a small community that works greatly together, great coordination, joint action, that is fulfilling for everybody, and then you have a city with millions of people having to share the same environment, the same river, the same roads, and things like that. So do you think a scale is an issue?
I mean, scale in that sense obviously is an issue. I guess yours is a rhetorical question, and I agree with you. But I also want to say that I think there is a lot we can do on people's feelings of agency over their decisions. And I think that's something really lost in the political process. And I think that cooperation and coordination and shared goals are in fact things that people care about and things that people like to do, as we've been saying, and in which they feel way more able to change their environment than they do in isolation. So there is a total upside of social interactions and social networks that is the possibility to find people. In big places, there is more probability to find someone like you than there is in small communities. So I find that is a really positive aspect of this gigantic social networks that we interact with. But obviously, from an economic point of view, and there are limitations and conflicting interests and all of the things that we know. But you can find groups to belong to, and groups with whom you can make active change, even in big places, even more so in big places. So it's
good that we have the means to find the groups and people now, right?
Right.
With the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. I really do think so. The
three of us are from 3 completely different cities on different continents.
We would have never found each other.
Yeah.
Otherwise.
Yeah, yes. That's phenomenal. And also you two are some of my closest friends. So that's also the degree of convergence that we've found just from different continents. That's also a phenomenal thing. And it also maybe highlights one of the important things that we need to include when we understand policy is obviously small scale societies can function better, but there's also greater behavioral goal-centric worldview heterogeneity in potentially small communities that are small only because of their location.
Yeah.
If it's just the location that makes the society, then you might get huge heterogeneity. You might get really simple conversations because everybody has different worldviews.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're able to get this more global society where people are able to move and then find people and then build these smaller communities, then you have something really interesting. And I guess one of the interesting questions for me is, how do we maintain a global internationalist perspective and view and system structure, but then also allow groups that form in locations, that people that have moved to those locations, how do they then have some degree of self-governance and the ability to sort of create, whether you call them syndicates or something else, structures that are self-maintaining for their own sake, self-governing. So I think that's super interesting. And here you have research into group level psychology, and then also intergroup between group psychology, how those syndicates then end up interacting with one another. To be hugely important if we're trying to figure out policy. Totally.
And I also think that a lot of policy references are still, are quite out of date with respect to social dynamics. And, I think a lot of neuroscience and cognitive science research on group belongings and intergroup interactions has been done sort of and ignored, not ignored actively, but just not put to available to policy making, and it's not part of the policy discourse. So I think, I don't know whether it's only a matter of maybe some limitations in the ability of academia to really communicate to the outside, and science communication is problematic in and of itself, and whenever there is anything that is content-wise controversial, it's also very easy for scientific information to be deformed and whatever. Or it's just that maybe there is interest in keep on representing people in a much simpler way than we actually are, right? If belittling people is a good form of control, and if agency is missing, right? If people don't think they can participate actively, then they will not even be able to defend themselves or to demonstrate actually what they really know, what they really perceive of the environment. And in a sense, simplifying the behavior and rationale of other human beings is as uninspired as thinking that 7 people control the whole world, or every answer is explainable by a god. Yeah. That's one of the tragedies, is we tend to gravitate sometimes towards simple explanations, and that can tend to also dehumanize individuals, in that we make them two-dimensional, which is exactly the opposite of what human beings are. Or we just make them irrational. Why they're not irrational? Right. Mm-hmm. They're just rational. Yeah. They're just using their motivations, as you said before. Yeah. They have a list of motivations, and they are the things that determines their decisions and preferences, not abstract utility models. Mm-hmm. We are reaching a limit. Do we? If you could give us what is driving you, just as a person, as a scientist, as somebody who, you covered so much, right? Even in this policy discussion of potential motivations. But is there a goal or something like an ideal endpoint that you see society reaching, or even society reaching like some kind of marker towards the end of your life? Like what's kind of driving you?
Well, what would be the best outcome of your work? Like the ideal,
my work as a scientist.
No, your work in life as Arianna, scientist, Secretary General of the UN, whatever it is. Yeah.
What would be the best outcome imaginable of it?
Okay, if I really want to change the world,
I don't know.
Yeah, give us like ideal.
You want me to change the world, right?
That's your answer.
Yeah. No, they should all stay the same. No, I'm joking. So if I could change, if I could reduce gender bias, and if I could change the discourse on inclusion of disability into policymaking, meaning including people with disability into the policymaking process and in decision process in a more respectful and effective way, so that they could make decisions for themselves, that would be like, okay, I can die in peace. But you are asking me these odd questions, so I'm answering it.
That's a great answer.
Yeah. Great.
Cool. I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much.
Cool.
Thank you very much,
guys.